the most beautiful woman in Chinese history. That's what the poets called her. 4,000 poems written about her face. Actually, she was the most expensive woman in human history. The price, 36 million lives. By the end, you'll know the price of the silk cord and who paid it. A white silk cord, a pear tree, freezing mud at a postal relay station in the middle of nowhere. Around the tree, thousands of starving soldiers, swords drawn, pointing at their own emperor. The most powerful man on earth, on his knees in the dirt, begging them to spare one woman's life. One man's obsession with one woman, a death toll that rivaled the First World War. The year, 756. The emperor, Xuanzong, call him the poet, 64 years old, once the greatest ruler in Tang history, now a hostage of his own bodyguards. The woman, Yang Guifei, call her the Beauty, 37 years old, originally married to the poet's own son, stolen, elevated, worshipped, and now surrounded by men demanding her death as the price of the emperor's survival. The scent of her 14-spice incense, agarwood, musk, camphor, still drifting from behind silk curtains. The smell of horse sweat and starving men pressing in from every side. Two worlds colliding in the mud. The empire's last argument, settled not with documents, but with a cord. The dynasty that produced gunpowder, porcelain, and 50,000 poems. Reduced to a standoff between a weeping old man and his own soldiers in a freezing relay station. Let that sink in. The year 740 AD. The Tang Dynasty is the wealthiest civilization on Earth. The capital, Chang'an, held 2 million people, the largest city in the world. Silk Road caravans carrying jade, spices, and gold from Persia to Korea. Markets stretching for miles. 50,000 poems produced in a single dynasty, more than all of ancient Rome. Gunpowder, porcelain, woodblock printing. The wealth made every kingdom in Europe look medieval, because they were. This golden age had an architect, the poet. And the poet was about to burn it all for a woman he stole from his own son. The easy verdict, blame the Beauty, a scheming concubine who clawed her way to the throne. The records tell a different story. She played the lute, she danced, she ate lychees. The flaw wasn't hers, it was his. The poet had ruled for 30 years, built the golden age, won the wars, filled the treasury. Now he was 60, bored with governing and consumed by a single desire, uninterrupted possession of one woman. The first crime, she was his son's wife. The poet saw her at a banquet and wanted her. He forced her into a Taoist nunnery under a fake religious name, scrubbing the marriage through a temple loophole to bypass the empire's own incest laws. Then he brought her into his bed. His son said nothing. In the Tang court, a father's desire outranked a son's marriage. The mandate of heaven, call it heaven's kill switch. The emperor rules only as long as heaven allows it. Abandon virtue and heaven presses the button. The dynasty flatlines. No second chances, no appeals. The poet had just stolen his own son's wife and called it love. Heaven's finger moved to the switch. To keep the Beauty happy, the poet handed the empire to her family. Her cousin, a gambling addict with no administrative experience, was promoted to chancellor. The empire's senior leadership replaced by one woman's relatives. The poet retreated to the Huaqing Hot Springs, a private palace of volcanic pools and pomegranate gardens outside the capital, the air thick with sulfur and incense. The sound of the world, a lute played by candlelight while border reports gathered dust in unopened satchels. The Beauty craved lychees, a fruit that grew only in the deep south and rotted within days. The poet built a relay system across 1,000 miles of empire, horses collapsing on the road. Imagine rerouting the entire federal mail system to deliver one woman's grocery order, horses dying so the fruit arrived fresh. Then came the adoption. A general named Lushan, call him the adopted beast. 300 pounds, Turkic-born, multilingual, brilliant at playing the fool. The beauty took a liking to him. In a court ritual, she legally adopted the 50-year-old warlord as her infant son, bathed him in an oversized tub while courtiers watched in stunned silence. The poet found it hilarious. The joke cost him his empire, because the adopted beast wasn't a fool. He was the commander of 3 northern frontier garrisons, 160,000 elite soldiers. Think of it as outsourcing national defense to a private military contractor. The poet gave him the troops, the tax revenue, and zero oversight. A warlord with a blank check and his own army. The beauty's cousin, now chancellor, sent 27 separate intelligence reports warning that the adopted beast was preparing to rebel. 27. The poet read none of them. But 150,000 soldiers were already sharpening their blades in the north. December 755. The adopted beast marches south. 150,000 armored cavalry. The ground shook for 33 days. Desperate couriers rode dying horses into the capital with the same message: "He's coming, he's coming, he's coming." The poet sat in his garden and told the court it was a misunderstanding. His adopted son would never betray him. It took the adopted beast 33 days to capture the eastern capital of Luoyang. He declared himself emperor of a new dynasty. The poet finally looked up from his lute. The empire had one last defense, Tongguan Pass, a fortress so narrow that 1,000 men could hold back 100,000. The border general begged to hold it, sit behind the stone, starve the rebels out. The strategy was sound. The beauty's cousin, the gambling addict chancellor, overruled him, ordered an open attack. Raw conscripts marched out of the fortress gates into hardened Turkic veterans. The pass fell in hours. The last wall between the rebels and the capital, shattered by a chancellor protecting his own political survival, not the empire. The road to Chang'an was open. 2 million people, undefended. July 756, the poet made his decision, not to fight, not to rally, to run. He slipped out the back gates of the imperial palace in the dead of night. No announcement, no evacuation order. 2 million people woke at dawn to find the imperial palace empty. The silence lasted seconds. An entire city holding its breath, listening for hoofbeats. Then the looting began. Then the fires. The staggering wealth of the Tang Golden Age, the gold, the silk, the jade, became the plunder that funded its own destruction. Markets that once traded with Persia were stripped bare in hours. Silk tapestries burned, gold bullion carried out by the cartload. The greatest city on earth gutted by the army its own emperor had armed and fed. Then the adopted beast walked into the empty throne room and sat down. The poet fled south with a skeleton guard, his household, and the beauty. 3 days on the road, no food, no supply train. The imperial guards, elite soldiers reduced to starving fugitives, watched the emperor's concubine glide past in a silk-curtained litter carried on poles while their stomachs cramped with hunger. The smell of her 14-spice incense cutting through the dust and horse sweat. Luxury floating past men who had lost everything protecting it. July 15th, 756. The convoy stops at Mawei Postal Station. The guards draw their swords, not against the enemy, against the emperor. They butcher the chancellor first, drag his body through the mud. Then they turn to the poet. The woman, or your life. The poet begged, wept, offered titles, gold, provinces. The The soldiers didn't move. These were men who had marched for 3 days without food, watching their comrades collapse on the road while the emperor's concubine rode past in perfumed silk. Every mile had sharpened the grievance. Every empty stomach had confirmed the accusation. The empire burned because of her. A white silk cord, a pear tree at the edge of the relay station, mud, cold wind, the sound of armed men breathing, thousands of them, waiting. The poet gave the order. A eunuch, a castrated servant whose only purpose was tending to palace affairs, led the beauty behind the station. She was 37. She walked through the mud in silk slippers. The cord tightened. The empire exhaled. Her silver incense sphere hit the dirt, still warm, still fragrant. The mechanical object that masked her scent, rolling to a stop in the same mud where her body was lowered into a shallow trench. The man who burned an empire to keep her was forced to kill her to save himself. The soldiers sheathed their swords. The poet mounted his horse. The convoy moved south. No one spoke. The incense faded. The mud froze over the trench. The poet survived the mutiny. His heart didn't, and heaven was not finished. 751 AD, 4 years before the rebellion. Tang armies clashed with the Abbasid Caliphate at the Talus River. 20,000 soldiers killed. The empire's western expansion severed permanently. The Silk Road began to close. Heaven cut the trade routes first. The 740s. No rain in the northern provinces for months. Locusts blackened the sky over the farmlands. A sound like static, millions of wings stripping the fields to bare soil. Peasants ate bark, then leather. The granaries stood empty while the postal relay carried fresh lychees north. Court astronomers recorded a gathering of 5 planets in the constellation of the Tail. The official interpretation, written in the imperial log, when armies throughout the realm plot strategy, the planets gather. Weeks later, the adopted beast marched. December 755. The poet built the lychee relay to prove his devotion. Heaven sent 150,000 cavalry south on those same roads. The routes the postal horses had flattened became highways for rebel armor. The beauty's tomb sits outside Xi'an. The poet's tomb is 40 miles away. They were never buried together. The poet abdicated. His son took the throne. The rebellion ground on for 8 more years. 757 AD, 1 year after the execution. The poet sent eunuchs back to Mawei to find her body. They dug through the frozen mud. The flesh was gone. The silk had rotted. But the silver incense sphere, the gimbal-mounted device she wore at her waist, was intact, still carrying the faint ghost of 14 spices. The one object engineered to survive time had outlasted everything: the woman, the love, the dynasty. The poet kept the perfume bag, clutched it in a secondary palace for 6 years until he died, a 76-year-old man weeping over the scent of a woman he killed with his own authority. The Lushan rebellion, 8 years. 36 million people vanished from the imperial census. Provincial offices sat empty. Census scrolls went unfilled. Entire districts silent. Whether killed, starved, or permanently displaced, 15% of the world's population erased from the emperor's ledger. The Tang Dynasty survived in name for another century and a half, but the Golden Age was dead. The empire never recovered its western territories, never recovered its confidence, never recovered the poems that burned with the libraries. The poet's score? 44 years as emperor, 1 stolen woman, 1 golden age. Heaven's score, 1 rebellion, 8 years, 36 million gone. Heaven wins. Today, tourists photograph the restored stone baths at Huaqing. They eat lychees from the gift shop, the location where an empire died, now a resort. The poem survives. Song of everlasting sorrow. Behind museum glass now, the poetry outlasted the dynasty, and the woman, and the man who wrote it all into fire. Heaven doesn't punish with cruelty. It punishes with arithmetic. 1 obsession, 27 ignored warnings, 36 million dead. The math was always simple. The poet refused to read it.